Hello. This is the next video in the series on psychotherapy and the principles and values that one finds in a psychotherapeutic situation and how these might be applicable outside of therapy and why these things might be important to consider. So the one I would like to talk about today is what we can maybe term consistency. I think in a general sense it would make sense to most people that you would like your therapist to be relatively consistent, that he or she would not vary greatly in their behavior, their thinking, their mood state and so forth from one time to the next, from one session to the next. I think the notion there has close links to the experience of trust, that your therapist can be someone who, because they are consistent, gives you the kind of space to unfold your own feelings, mind, your own psyche in a way that is comfortable and that you don't necessarily feel that the therapist is impinging or intruding or intrusive in any way with regards to their own stuff. So I think that's a principle that's fairly easy to understand in the context of therapy. I recently had a patient who he asked me something along the lines of how my week was, which is sort of the cliched idea that this is kind of what a therapist asks. But and I responded, well, pretty much like the previous weeks. Now there's I think, if I remember correctly, that was more or less correct. I didn't lie, but at the same time, it would not be useful for a psychotherapist to divulge all the variance in experience to the patient, and then perhaps we can have a discussion about that at some stage, because that also relates to boundaries, and I might come back to the notion of boundaries in this conversation. And the patient, anyway, I said something to the effect that this week has been more or less the same as the previous weeks that you have seen me, and he hadn't been seeing me for very long. And he was a little bit taken aback, and he kind of exclaimed that sure, that there's no way for him, that is no way for him to live, that he can't bear the thought of having one week sort of being the same as the previous one. Alright, so that juxtaposes these two contrasting points of view. The one has to do with variety, novelty, and excitement, maybe, as opposed to consistency and sameness. Now, where do we find ourselves? Why is this something that we may want to consider at all in life outside of therapy? Why is this something important to think about? Isn't it better to live a life of excitement and novelty and so on? Well, I don't think there's anything particularly wrong with that. I think, of course, in the context of therapy, seeking excitement from the side of the therapist can be quite problematic, and we are taught very early on how and in which ways this is problematic. Our job is not to kind of use the space or the patient for our own excitement or our own needs, but to provide something for the needs of somebody else. And therein, I think, lies an important measure for consistency. Like I said, consistency is, in this context, related to trustworthiness, of dependability, of knowing that the person that you meet today is more or less the kind of person that you met last week. And therefore also that next time you meet that person, he or she will be more or less the same. that you can start trusting their presence and the nature of their presence. Now, this is not to say that there is no spontaneity, but we are speaking of a deeper seated kind of stability. We use phrases like solidity, solid as a rock, to describe this notion of dependability. That somebody doesn't waver in something quite important. Of course, one's behavior might be different. If I come to work one day and I have the flu, I'm not going to be the same in my behavior as I am when I am completely healthy. Hopefully, my behavior won't deviate that much that it will be to the detriment of the patient, but obviously I will behave in a different fashion, and I might also have different or less access to the kinds of thought and feeling that I might have otherwise. So that's not the kind of, I'm not speaking of being identical from one instance to the next, or one session to the next. I'm speaking of that the person finds you as a person to have a stable sameness that they can relate to time and again and depend on. So in life outside of therapy, we are often enamored, sometimes even seduced by people who appear exciting, who bring very novel ideas and behaviors to the table, and we find these people stimulating. Now, again, there's nothing wrong with that in essence, but I suppose the question you have to ask is, what they are. It's a bit like an investor, or you're finding a good investor. There are people who can go out and buy all kinds of luxury items and who wear fancy clothes and jewelry and all the kinds of accessories that one might expect, and you never see them in the same clothes or shoes twice in a row. And it might be quite exciting to be in the company of such people, especially if they in some way sweep you up in their generosity or their expansive nature. But would you trust that person with your money? Well, okay, so that changes the situation a little bit. So it is a situation in which we entrust somebody with aspects of ourselves that if they are not dependable around those things, and in my line of work often this has to do with things that they have to do with a lot of vulnerability or woundedness or secrets. So if you find a person to be not dependable with certain qualities or parts of oneself, of course it causes more fear, it causes more stress. So you want a person who is likely to honor your experience or honor your thoughts or honor your privacy or honor your vulnerability in such a way that you know you can depend on them. Now, while in therapy it is also useful to be to behave in ways that are consistent, this does not necessarily follow that in the external life or life outside of therapy this should be so. I can have many varieties of ways of behaving but still come across as dependable. When one is dependable, people tend to entrust you with more. So if you are a good investor, if we continue that metaphor, people are likely to recommend their friends to you and to try and scrounge up more money for you to invest for them. So the return on investment is greater than somebody who is not dependable. I said that maybe I would touch on the notion of boundaries. This is essential to a space like psychotherapy, but also in life. But I think that is going to be a much longer topic, so I hope to return to this in the next talk. So just to summarize then, the importance of being dependable, to have a certain kind of inner consistency, not necessarily behavioral consistency, is of great importance. And we have to be careful to assume that we have it just because we would like to have it. This is something that can be cultivated, especially if we understand how important it is. But not everybody has it, and we must not assume somebody has it just because they say they have it. Again, the proof of the pudding is in the eating, and how it generally works in interactions is that we entrust a person with a bit, see what they do with that, and then later on, when we have grown to trust them with that, we might invest a bit more. So if people tend to not trust you with their secrets or their vulnerabilities over a period of time, so they do it maybe once, but they don't seem to do it again, I think that's an important bit of feedback, and perhaps important conversations can flow from that. But if people do that, it probably means that they've experienced you as having something of that quality. And that is an important value or quality to build on and to enhance. All right, thank you for your time and attention. I will return in this series at the moment, probably with the notion or the idea of boundaries. Thank you very much for watching.